I'm Isabella, 31 female. I live in a small, quiet apartment that smells perpetually of old books and brewing tea, a sanctuary from the academic rigors of my work as a university researcher. For 7 long years, I poured my soul into a doctorate in historical linguistics, a field my family found both obscure and unimpressive. This story isn't about the drama of my research, but about the quiet, suffocating drama of a family that only knows how to celebrate one of its children. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The crystal glasses chimed, a sound as clear and sharp as the tension coiled in my stomach. We were gathered for one of my mother's infamous Sunday dinners, an event less about family connection and more about public performance. The dining room of my parents' house was her stage. The mahogany table gleamed under the light of a chandelier, the silverware was polished to a mirror shine, and the scent of roasted rosemary chicken was thick in the air. About 20 of us were there, a mix of immediate family, aunts, uncles, and cousins, all dressed in the unspoken uniform of casual wealth. My mother, Victoria Reyes, presided over it all from the head of the table, a queen surveying her court. At 60, she was impeccable, her silver-streaked hair styled perfectly, her smile a carefully constructed mask of maternal warmth that never quite reached her eyes. She was a professional charity gala organizer, which meant her entire life was about curating appearances, and her family was her most important exhibit. Beside her, basking in the glow of both the chandelier and our mother's adoration, sat my younger sister, Sophia. At 29, Sophia was everything I was. She was a corporate lawyer at a top-tier firm, a profession my mother could easily brag about. Sophia was polished, articulate, and carried herself with an unshakable confidence that came from a lifetime of being told she was exceptional. She was the golden child, the sun around which our family's solar system revolved. I, on the other hand, was the distant, strange planet, the academic, the quiet one, the daughter who chose dusty libraries over dazzling boardrooms. 3 weeks prior, I had successfully defended my doctoral dissertation. 7 years of relentless work, of deciphering ancient texts, of sacrificing weekends and social events, had culminated in 2 letters being added before my name. Doctor, a part of me, a naive, hopeful part, thought this achievement might finally be significant enough to register on my mother's scale of success. I had told her the news over the phone, and her response was a tepid, "Oh, that's nice, dear. So, are you done with school now?" Tonight, I had hoped for a small acknowledgement, maybe a brief mention in front of the family. It felt childish to want it, but the desire for a parent's approval is a stubborn, primal thing. The meal progressed as it always did, with talk of stock portfolios, vacation homes, and office politics. I contributed little, offering quiet smiles and nodding at the appropriate times. My field of study didn't make for easy small talk. Explaining the phonetic shifts in late Proto-Indo-European languages tended to glaze over people's eyes. Sophia, however, held court, recounting a recent victory in a high-stakes corporate merger with the dramatic flair of a seasoned storyteller. My mother hung on her every word, her face alight with pride. Finally, as dessert was served, a decadent chocolate lava cake that felt like a mockery of the bitterness in my mouth, my mother stood up, tapping her glass with a dessert fork. The room fell silent. "If I could have everyone's attention for a moment," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "I have a wonderful announcement to make." She beamed, placing a hand on Sophia's shoulder. As you all know, our Sophia has been working incredibly hard at her firm. It's a competitive, demanding world, and she has navigated it with grace and brilliance. She paused for dramatic effect. Well, last week, she was offered a promotion to senior counsel. It comes with a corner office, a significant raise, and a level of prestige that, frankly, she has more than earned. We are just so incredibly proud of her. The room erupted in applause. Cousins and aunts called out their congratulations. My father, a quiet man long accustomed to his supporting role, looked at Sophia with genuine pride. Sophia accepted the praise with a practiced humility, a slight blush on her cheeks that I knew was part of the performance. "Thank you, Mom," she said. Thank you, everyone. It's been a lot of work, but I'm thrilled. My mother then raised her glass. Let's all raise a glass to Sophia, to her success, her future, and to our wonderful, brilliant daughter. Everyone stood, their glasses held high. I stood too, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. My hand trembled slightly as I lifted my glass of water. Our eyes met across the table, my mother's and mine. In that fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in her gaze. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a choice. She knew about my PhD, she knew the work it represented, and she had deliberately, publicly chosen to erase it. It was a power play, a clear and brutal statement of my value in her world. 0. I murmured congratulations, Sophia, the words tasting like ash. The rest of the dinner was a blur. The chatter resumed, now centered entirely on Sophia's achievement. People asked her about her new role, her salary, the view from her new office. No one looked at me. It was as if I were a ghost at the table, a specter of uncelebrated effort. The public nature of the disregard was what stung the most. It wasn't just a private slight. It was a formal declaration to our entire family that my life's work was meaningless. While Sophia was toasted for climbing a corporate ladder, I was rendered invisible for building a monument of knowledge. The pain was so sharp, so intense, it felt like a physical blow. I excused myself as soon as it was polite to do so, offering a weak excuse about an early morning. My mother gave me an air kiss, her cheek cold and perfumed. "So lovely to see you, dear," she said, her attention already drifting back to the crowd fawning over Sophia. As I walked to my car in the cool night air, the forced smile on my face finally crumbled. The years of feeling like an afterthought, of being the other daughter, coalesced into a single, profound moment of humiliation. I didn't cry. I was too empty for tears. I just got in my car and drove, the cheerful sounds of my family's celebration fading behind me, leaving only a profound and deafening silence. The drive home was a journey through a gallery of past slights, each one a perfectly preserved portrait of my place in the family. The steering wheel felt cold and unyielding beneath my hands, a stark contrast to the burning resentment in my chest. This wasn't a new feeling. It was a chronic ache I had learned to live with, but tonight's public dismissal had turned it into an acute, throbbing wound. My mother's favoritism wasn't loud or aggressive, it was far more insidious. It was a subtle, constant current that shaped our entire family dynamic, a quiet campaign of validation for Sophia and polite indifference for me. It was in the small things, the cumulative weight of which had pressed me into the shape of an outsider in my own home. I remembered being 10 years old and winning the district science fair. I had spent months building a detailed model of the solar system with a working orbital motor. I was so proud, my blue ribbon clutched in my hand. When I showed my mother, she was on the phone planning one of her charity events. She glanced at it, smiled vaguely, and said, "That's wonderful, sweetie. Now can you keep it down? I'm trying to confirm the catering." Later that week, Sophia, who was 8, won a small, plastic trophy for best effort in her ballet recital. My mother had it professionally engraved and cleared a space for it on the living room mantelpiece, where it sat for years. My blue ribbon ended up in a box in my closet. Throughout our school years, the pattern was set. Sophia's successes were public triumphs, mine were private hobbies. Her lead role in the school play was cause for a family party. My acceptance into a prestigious summer program for linguistics was met with, "But will you have any fun? It sounds so studious." Her report cards, always filled with glowing comments about her charming personality and leadership skills, were framed. Mine, filled with top marks but notes about my quiet and reserved nature, were acknowledged with a simple, "Good work, Isabella." The message was clear. What Sophia did was important because it was visible, social, and impressive to others. What I did was an esoteric, solitary pursuit that held no social currency. My father was a passive accomplice in this. He was a kind but non-confrontational man who had long ago learned that the path of least resistance was to agree with my mother. He loved me, I think, but he didn't know how to advocate for me against the force of nature that was his wife. His approval was a quiet, gentle thing, easily drowned out by my mother's grand pronouncements about Sophia. The ultimate symbol of our divergent paths was our choice of career. Sophia chose law, a field of clear hierarchies, public victories, and tangible rewards. My mother understood it. She could brag about it at her luncheons. When Sophia was accepted into a top law school, my mother threw a lavish party that rivaled the one I'd just left. When I was accepted into my PhD program, with a full scholarship and a teaching stipend, my mother's primary reaction was confusion. "So they're paying you to be a student for another 7 years?" she asked, a delicate frown creasing her brow. "What kind of job does that even lead to?" It was impossible to explain to her the passion I felt for my work, the thrill of tracing a word's origin back through millennia, of seeing the ghost of a dead language reflected in a modern one. To her, a job was a title and a salary, a means to acquire status. My work offered a different kind of wealth, one she had no way of measuring and therefore no way of valuing. This fundamental difference was why tonight had been so predictable and yet so devastating. My PhD wasn't just another school achievement. It was the culmination of my entire adult life. It was the summit of a mountain I had been climbing for years, often alone. To have it treated as a non-event, to have it completely eclipsed by Sophia's corporate promotion, a standard step on a predictable career path, felt like a definitive and final judgment on my life's worth. It confirmed my deepest fear, that in my mother's eyes I would never, ever be enough. My sister, Sophia, wasn't malicious. She was simply a product of her environment. She had never known a world that didn't revolve around her. She accepted our mother's adoration as her birthright and my place in the shadows as the natural order of things. She wasn't unkind to me, but she was casually dismissive, the way one might be to a distant cousin. We shared parents and a childhood home, but we were not close. Our lives ran on parallel tracks that rarely, if ever, intersected. When I arrived at my small, book-filled apartment, the silence was a relief. I shrugged off my coat and sank onto the sofa, the phantom weight of my family's expectations lifting from my shoulders. There were no performances required here. I didn't have to pretend to be thrilled about a promotion I didn't care about or swallow the bitterness of being ignored. Here I was just Isabella. Dr. Isabella Reyes. I said it aloud to the empty room, the words feeling both strange and satisfying. Here in my sanctuary, that title meant something, even if it didn't mean anything in my mother's polished, superficial world. I closed my eyes, the scene at the dinner table playing over and over in my mind. The raised glasses, the beaming smiles, my mother's proud voice toasting the wrong daughter. The humiliation had settled deep in my bones, a cold, heavy thing. I felt adrift, disconnected from the very people who were supposed to be my anchor. Little did I know, an anchor was coming, but it wasn't from them. It was a message from the past, a lifeline from the one person who had always seen me for who I truly was. I spent the next 2 days in a self-imposed exile, cocooned in my apartment. I muted the family group chat, ignored my mother's perfunctory text asking if I got home, all right, and let my father's call go to voicemail. I needed space to let the sharp edges of the humiliation soften into the familiar, dull ache of resignation. I graded papers for the undergraduate course I was teaching, lost myself in a translation of a medieval poem, and tried to convince myself that I didn't need their approval. I had my degree. I had a career I was passionate about. I had a life I had built for myself on my own terms. It was almost enough. But the feeling of being an outsider in one's own origin story is a difficult ghost to exorcise. It was Tuesday evening. I was curled on my sofa with a cup of chamomile tea, trying to focus on a journal article, when my phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. I glanced at it, expecting another platitude from a well-meaning relative who had witnessed Sunday's spectacle and felt a pang of pity. Instead, I saw the name, Uncle Mateo. My Uncle Mateo was my mother's younger brother, and he was the family's gentle eccentric, or as my mother liked to call him, the sentimentalist. He was an antiquarian bookseller, a man who, much like me, preferred the quiet company of the past to the noisy demands of the present. He and my grandfather, Julian Reyes, had been incredibly close. My grandfather had been a retired classics professor, a man whose intellect was matched only by his kindness. He was the one who had nurtured my love for language and history, the one who saw my quiet nature not as a flaw but as a sign of a rich inner world. He had passed away 2 years ago, and his absence was a void the family never truly acknowledged. To my mother, his death was a social event to be managed. To me, it was the loss of my truest ally. Uncle Mateo was the executor of my grandfather's will, a role he took with solemn dedication. He rarely initiated contact, preferring to keep his distance from the family's high drama, so a text from him was unusual. My thumb hovered over the notification, a sense of trepidation mixing with my curiosity. I opened it. The message was short, but every word landed with the force of a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the surface of my life. It read, "Isabella, hope you're well. Your grandfat. Her left you his entire library. There is a letter for you in it. Let me know when you'd like to come see it." I read the message once, twice, a third time. My grandfather's library. It wasn't just a collection of books. It was his soul made manifest. It was a sprawling, magnificent room in his old house, filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound volumes, first editions, and annotated texts in Greek and Latin. It was the room where he taught me to read, where we'd spent countless hours discussing ancient myths and tracing the etymology of words. It was my favorite place in the world. The will had been read shortly after he died, of course. My mother and uncle had received the bulk of the financial assets. Sophia and I had been left modest but generous trusts. The house itself had gone to Mateo, who had lovingly preserved it. The library, however, had been a point of contention. My mother had wanted to have it appraised and sold off, calling the books dusty old relics. Mateo had fiercely resisted, stating that Julian's instructions on the matter were specific and private. I had assumed he meant they were to be donated or kept in his care. I never, in my wildest dreams, imagined they were for me. His entire library. The scale of the inheritance was staggering. It wasn't about monetary value, it was about the legacy. It was the most profound validation I could possibly imagine. He had left me the one thing he treasured most in the world. And the letter. There is a letter for you in it. My heart hammered against my ribs. What could he possibly have needed to tell me that he hadn't said in life? My grandfather was not a man for secrets. He was direct, honest, and saw the world with a clarity that often made my mother uncomfortable. Why would he leave a posthumous letter? 100 questions swirled in my mind. Did my mother know about this? Surely not. She would have fought it, tried to have me declared incompetent, or argued that Sophia, the lawyer, was better equipped to handle such a valuable asset. My fingers, trembling slightly, typed out a reply to Mateo. "I'm stunned, Uncle Mateo. I had no idea. I can come this weekend." "Is Saturday morning okay?" His response was almost instantaneous. "Saturday is perfect. The key will be waiting for you. He was so proud of you, Isabella. Never forget that." Tears I hadn't been able to shed on Sunday night now welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. They weren't tears of sadness or humiliation, but of overwhelming gratitude and a fierce, protective love for the man who had seen me. While my mother had been toasting Sophia's promotion, a far greater inheritance had been waiting for me in the wings, a legacy of knowledge, history, and unconditional love. The bitterness of the dinner party began to recede, replaced by a burgeoning sense of purpose. This was more than a gift. It felt like an instruction, a passing of a torch. My grandfather, the quiet academic, had left me, his quiet granddaughter, his life's work. The letter, I sensed, was the key to understanding why. As I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the glow of my phone illuminating the tears on my face, I felt a profound shift within me. The narrative of my life, which had for so long been defined by my mother's dismissive script, was about to be rewritten. And the author was a man who had loved me enough to speak to me from beyond the grave. Saturday morning arrived with a cool, autumn crispness that seemed to mirror the clarity settling in my mind. The 2-hour drive to my grandfather's house, a charming Victorian home in a sleepy university town, was a pilgrimage. This house had always been a refuge from the sterile perfection of my parents' home. Here, the floors creaked, the air smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, and intellectual curiosity was the highest virtue. Uncle Mateo was true to his word. He greeted me at the door with a warm, sad smile, his eyes kind and understanding. He looked older than his 58 years, his shoulders stooped slightly as if carrying the weight of the family's history. "He would be so happy you're here," Mateo said, his voice soft. He handed me a heavy, ornate iron key. This was his key to the study. He made me promise to give it to you directly. I'll be in the garden if you need anything. Take all the time you need. I thanked him, my throat tight with emotion, and walked down the familiar hallway. The door to the library was at the far end, a formidable slab of dark oak. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy clunk, a sound that seemed to echo through the years. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Time stood still in that room. Sunlight streamed through the tall, bay windows, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny, glittering stars. The scent, a rich, comforting blend of leather, paper, and wood polish, enveloped me like a hug. It was exactly as I remembered it. Thousands of books lined the walls, a silent congregation of the greatest minds in history. A large mahogany desk stood in the center of the room, its surface clear except for a single, thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on it in my grandfather's familiar, elegant script, Isabella. My heart pounded as I walked towards it, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug. I sank into his worn leather chair, the cool material a familiar comfort. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing it all in, feeling his presence in the quiet hum of the room. Then, with unsteady hands, I picked up the envelope and broke the wax seal, which was stamped with his personal insignia, a small owl. The letter inside was several pages long, written on heavy stationery. I began to read. My dearest Isabella, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally come into your inheritance. I hope you are not reading this with a heavy heart, but with the spirit of curiosity I always so admired in you. I have left you my library, my most prized possession, for a simple reason. You are the only one in this family who understands that a book is not just an object, but a vessel for truth. My eyes welled up, but I blinked the tears away, determined to read on. I have watched you grow up in the shadow of your sister, a shadow cast not by her own light, but by your mother's desperate need for a certain kind of success. Victoria is my daughter, and I love her, but I have been deeply disappointed by the path she has chosen. She values appearance over substance, applause over achievement. She sees your quiet brilliance not as a gift, but as a social inconvenience. I am sorry for every time she made you feel small, for every achievement she overlooked. It was a failure of her vision, not of your worth. The words were a balm on wounds I didn't even know were still open. He had seen it all. He had understood. He went on to explain the true purpose of the library. This room, my dear girl, is more than a collection of books. It is a repository of our family's real history, a history your mother has done her best to edit, revise, and bury. She has crafted a narrative of our family, one of effortless success and genteel ancestry, that is largely a work of fiction. The truth is far more complex, and it is contained within these walls. This was the part that made me lean forward, my breath catching in my throat. Our family did not come from old money, as Victoria would have people believe. My father, your great-grandfather, started a small but respected publishing house, Ray's Press, right here in this town. He built it from nothing, fueled by a love for literature and a belief in the power of the written word. It was our family's legacy. When he passed, the press fell to me, but I was an academic, not a businessman. Your mother, however, showed great promise. She was sharp, ambitious, and had a flair for business. I made her a partner, believing she would carry the legacy into the future. But she had other ideas. In the late 80s, when the publishing industry was facing challenges, instead of fighting to adapt, she saw an opportunity. She deliberately ran the press into the ground, mismanaging funds and rejecting promising manuscripts, all while convincing me it was a hopeless cause. She orchestrated its bankruptcy. Why? Because the buyout of the company's assets, which she engineered, provided her with a substantial sum of cash. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to sever ties with our humble origins and reinvent herself as the socialite she always wanted to be. It funded the down payment on your parents' lavish house, the private schools, the designer clothes, and the foundation of the image she has so carefully maintained for 30 years. I sat back, stunned. The story I had been told was that Ray's Press had simply failed, a sad casualty of changing times. I had no idea my mother had been the architect of its demise. My grandfather's letter concluded with an instruction. The evidence of this is all here, Isabella, hidden in plain sight. I have left you a trail. Look in the books she claimed to have read, the ones she displayed but never opened. Look for my notes in the margins. The truth is in the details, as it always is. This library is now your shield and your sword. What you do with this knowledge is up to you. You can let the lie stand, or you can reclaim our family's true legacy. Know that whatever you choose, I am, and always will be, immensely proud of you. Your loving grandfather, Julian. I let the pages fall onto the desk. The quiet room seemed to buzz with the energy of this revelation. My mother hadn't just ignored my achievements, she had built her entire life on a foundation of deceit, sacrificing her own family's intellectual heritage for social status. The irony was staggering. She had dismissed my academic life, my world of books and research, yet the truth of her own life was hidden right there, in a library. I looked around the room. Not just as a collection of books, but as an archive, a crime scene. A cold, quiet resolve settled over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore, not in a petty sense. This was about justice. It was about honoring my grandfather and the great-grandfather I'd never known. My mother had toasted Sophia for becoming a part of the corporate world she so admired. I would use the skills my grandfather had taught me, patience, research, and a deep respect for the text, to uncover the world she had destroyed. The game had changed. My mother had played her hand at the dinner party, and now, my grandfather had just dealt me a new one from beyond the grave. The week that followed was a blur of methodical, obsessive research. I took a leave of absence from the university, telling my department head I had an urgent family matter to attend to, which was the truest statement I had made in years. I packed a suitcase and moved into my grandfather's house, effectively turning his library into my command center. Uncle Mateo was a quiet, supportive presence. He seemed to understand the gravity of my task without needing an explanation, keeping me supplied with coffee and sandwiches and leaving me to my work. My mother called once, her voice laced with annoyance. "Isabella, your father tells me you're staying at your grandfather's old house. It's so musty. What on earth are you doing there?" "Going through his things," I replied, my voice even and calm. "It's what he wanted." "Well, don't take too long," she said, her tone dismissive. "Sophia is having a small get-together to celebrate her promotion next weekend, and you simply have to be there." The invitation felt like a summons, another opportunity for me to play my role as the supportive, invisible sister. "I'll see if I can make it," I said, a new, hard edge to my voice that I didn't recognize. "I have a lot to do here." My grandfather's instructions were my guide. Look in the books she claimed to have read. I started with the pristine, leather-bound sets of classics that lined the shelves in the most prominent part of the room: Dickens, Austen, the Brontes. My mother had often referred to them in conversation to project an image of intellectual depth. I knew she'd never read them. I pulled a copy of Great Expectations. The pages were stiff, the spine uncracked, but as I flipped through, I noticed it. In the margins of a chapter discussing wealth and social climbing, there was a faint pencil annotation in my grandfather's tiny, precise script. It wasn't a comment on the text. It was a call number, a sequence of letters and numbers used to locate a book in a library. This was the trail. For hours, I hunted. I pulled down book after book from the show shelves, finding more cryptic notes. A copy of Vanity Fair had a note pointing me to a dusty volume on corporate law from the 1980s. A pristine edition of The Great Gatsby had a margin note leading to a dry textbook on bankruptcy proceedings. It was a brilliant, intricate puzzle designed by a master scholar. He had used his library as a filing system, hiding the truth of my mother's betrayal within the very symbols of knowledge she pretended to respect. The key documents were hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of The Art of War. There were old financial ledgers from Ray's Press, letters between my mother and a corporate lawyer she had secretly hired, and copies of bank statements. The evidence was damning and meticulously organized. The ledgers showed the press was struggling but solvent. It needed modernization, a fresh vision, but it was far from the hopeless cause my mother had described. The letters were the smoking gun. They detailed her strategy: to undervalue the press's assets, specifically its back catalog and rights, and to sell them to a shell corporation she had set up through her lawyer. She had then liquidated that corporation, funneling the money directly into a private account. It was a cold, calculated act of corporate sabotage carried out against her own family. She hadn't just let the press fail, she had actively, methodically destroyed it. Among the papers, I found something else, something even more personal and painful. It was a letter my grandfather had written to my mother but had never sent. It was dated a year after the press closed. "Victoria," it read, "I know what you did. I don't know why you felt such a profound betrayal was necessary, but I see now that the legacy I hope to pass on means nothing to you. You have traded a heritage of ideas for a portfolio of stocks. You have chosen a life of glittering surfaces, and I am afraid of what this will do to your soul. I mourn the loss of our family's press, but I mourn the loss of your integrity more. I will not confront you, because I will not give you the satisfaction of a fight. I will simply watch, and I will hope that one day you find your way back to something true." He had never sent it. He had chosen to live with the knowledge of her betrayal in sea. Lentz protecting the family from a schism, perhaps hoping she would change. She never did. Instead, she had doubled down, using the money she'd stolen to build a life that was a complete fabrication. She had raised her daughters in that lie, celebrating the one who mirrored her own superficial values and shunning the one who embodied the intellectual legacy she had callously discarded. For a moment, rage, pure and white-hot, washed over me, but it quickly subsided, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. My grandfather's silence had been an act of sorrowful resignation. Mine would be an act of restoration. My plan began to form, not in a flash of anger, but piece by piece, as I sorted through the evidence. It wouldn't be enough to simply expose her. That would be her kind of victory, a dramatic, ugly scene that would ultimately become another story she could spin. No, my response had to be more meaningful. It had to be about rebuilding, not just tearing down. I spent the next few days on the phone, making quiet inquiries. I contacted a lawyer specializing in intellectual property. I spoke to a small, independent printer in the next town. I researched what it would take to resurrect a defunct publishing house. The rights to my great-grandfather's original publications, and most of the press's back catalog, had been so poorly managed in the Shell Corporation's liquidation that they had eventually lapsed into the public domain or reverted to the author's estates. But the name, Ray's Press, was available. The final piece of my plan came from my own finances. The trust my grandfather had left me, the one my mother had seen as a paltry, secondary inheritance compared to her own, was more than enough to provide the seed capital. It was poetic justice. The money he had given me would be used to undo the damage my mother had done with the money she had stolen. The stage was set. Sophia's small get-together was in 3 days. It would be at my parents' house, the house built on the ruins of Ray's Press. The same cast of characters from that humiliating Sunday dinner would be there. My mother intended it to be another coronation for Sophia, another celebration of the values she held dear. She had no idea it was going to be a memorial service for the life she had so carefully constructed. I wasn't going to scream or cry. I was going to do what I do best, present my research, calmly and methodically, with all my sources cited. I was going to give a reading. I arrived at my parents' house on Saturday evening feeling a strange and profound calm. I was dressed simply, in a dark blazer and trousers, a stark contrast to the cocktail dresses and designer labels that filled the living room. The party was already in full swing, the air buzzing with conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. My mother, Victoria, glided through the crowd, the perfect hostess, her smile radiant. She spotted me and her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Isabella, you made it." I was beginning to worry you'd decided to become a hermit in that dusty old house. She gestured to my outfit. "You look a little severe for a party, dear." "I've been working," I said, my voice neutral. "I have something to share with the family." Her eyes narrowed slightly, sensing a shift in my demeanor. "Well, tonight is about Sophia. Any announcements from you can wait." She turned away, dismissing me before I could respond. I saw Sophia holding court by the fireplace, recounting a story to a rapt audience of cousins. She looked happy, confident, and completely unaware that the foundation of her world was about to crumble. My uncle Mateo arrived a few minutes after I did. He caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. He was the only other person who knew that tonight was more than a party. I waited patiently, letting the celebration reach its peak. Finally, just as my mother was preparing to make another toast, I stepped into the center of the room. I was holding a leather-bound folio I had prepared. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the chatter. "If I could have your attention for a moment." The room quieted and all eyes turned to me. My mother looked furious at the interruption. "Isabella, what do you think you're doing?" "You said tonight was about celebrating this family's success," I replied, looking directly at her. "I agree, which is why I think it's the perfect time to talk about our family's true legacy." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Sophia shot me an irritated look. I opened the folio. "Most of you know my grandfather, Julian Reyes, as a classics professor, but he was also the son of a great man, my great-grandfather, who founded the Reyes Press. It was a respected small press, dedicated to literature and history. It was the original source of this family's prosperity, a legacy of intellect and passion." I paused, letting the words sink in. We were all told the press failed, that it was a victim of the times. This, like so many other stories we've been told, is a fiction. My mother's face had gone pale. "Isabella, this is neither the time nor the place." "This is the perfect time and place," I said, my voice firm, "since this house, this life, was paid for by its destruction." I then began my presentation, my final reading. I spoke calmly, as if delivering a university lecture. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stated the facts I had uncovered. "I have spent the past week in my grandfather's library, which he left to me in its entirety." A gasp went through the room at this revelation. I continued, "And in that library, he left me a complete history of the Reyes Press, including the story of its final days." I held up a copied ledger sheet, its figures clear and precise. "Exhibit A, the financial records from 1988. They show a company that was struggling, yes, but was financially viable. It needed investment, not liquidation." I then held up a copy of a letter. "Exhibit B, a letter from a potential investor offering to partner with the press, an offer that was inexplicably rejected by the press's managing partner at the time." All eyes went to my mother. Her carefully constructed composure was beginning to crack, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. "And who was that managing partner?" I continued, my voice resonating in the stunned silence. "It was my mother, Victoria Reyes." Sophia stepped forward. "Isabella, what is wrong with you? Why are you attacking Mom?" "I'm not attacking her," I said, turning to my sister. "I'm presenting my research, and my research shows that our mother didn't just reject that offer. She systematically dismantled her own father's company. She sold off its assets through a shell corporation, effectively stealing the family's inheritance to fund a new life for herself. A life of galas, designer clothes, and this very house." I let that statement hang in the air. The silence was deafening. My cousins and aunts were staring at my mother, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The final piece of my presentation was my grandfather's unsent letter. I read it aloud, his words of sorrow and disappointment filling the room. "You have traded a heritage of ideas for a portfolio of stocks. I mourn the loss of your integrity more." When I finished, my mother was trembling, her face ashen. "You're lying," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You've always been a jealous, spiteful child." "I have every document right here," I said, tapping the folio. "Bank statements, legal correspondence, all of it. Grandfather was nothing if not thorough." Sophia looked from me to her mother, her confident exterior completely gone, replaced by a look of utter confusion and horror. "Mom, is this true?" Victoria didn't answer. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. She had been unmasked. Her entire identity, the one she had so carefully curated for 3 decades, had been exposed as a fraud in front of her entire court. I closed the folio. "So, yes, let's toast to success," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. "But not to a promotion in a corporate world built on artifice. Let's toast to the truth, and let's toast to the future. Because as the new owner of my grandfather's legacy, I am officially announcing that I will be re-establishing the Reyes Press." Its first publication will be a history of my great-grandfather's work, ensuring that our true family legacy is never forgotten again. There was no applause. There was only a thick, heavy silence, filled with the weight of a 30-year-old lie. My mother, for the first time in her life, was speechless. I had not screamed, I had not cried. I had used the tools of my own quiet world, research, evidence, and the power of the written word to completely and irrevocably dismantle hers. The reading was over. The aftermath of my final reading was not a fiery explosion but a slow, silent collapse. No one shouted. No one threw a drink. The party simply dissolved. People left in quiet, awkward pairs, murmuring excuses, their eyes avoiding my mother. They had come to celebrate one version of success and had instead borne witness to the unmasking of a deep and sordid deception. For them, it was a shocking piece of gossip. For our family, it was a seismic event that had permanently altered the landscape. My mother, Victoria, did not collapse into tears or rage. Instead, a chilling stillness settled over her. She stood frozen in the middle of her living room, the ruins of her social standing scattered around her feet, and looked at me as if I were a stranger, a dangerous, foreign entity she no longer recognized. My father, who had watched the entire scene with a look of pained resignation, finally seemed to find his voice. He walked over to my mother, not with anger, but with a profound, weary sadness, and led her from the room. I was left standing here with Sophia and my Uncle Matteo. Sophia, for her part, was utterly shattered. Her entire life, her sense of self, had been predicated on the belief that she was the deserving heir to a legacy of effortless achievement. To learn that her pedestal was built on a foundation of theft and deceit was a blow from which she couldn't immediately recover. "All this time," she whispered, her voice trembling, looking at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "My entire life was paid for by this," I nodded, feeling a flicker of pity for her. "She was a victim in this too, albeit a willing and privileged one." "Grandfather left you a trust," I said softly. "That money was clean, the rest of it, the lifestyle, the image, that was from the press." She didn't say anything else. She simply walked out of the house, leaving me alone with Matteo. He came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Julian would be proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not because you exposed Victoria, but because you chose to build something in its place. You honored him." In the weeks that followed, the fallout continued. My mother became a recluse. Her social circle, built on the shifting sands of image and wealth, evaporated overnight. The shame of public exposure was a prison from which her pride would not allow her to escape. She refused to speak to me. My father called once, his voice tired. He didn't apologize for her actions, but he didn't defend them either. He just sounded like a man who was finally living in the quiet, uncomfortable truth. The relationship with Sophia became the most complicated. She called me a week later. She was angry, hurt, and confused. She accused me of humiliating her, of ruining her life. But beneath the anger, I could hear a note of genuine crisis. Her promotion, once a source of immense pride, now felt tainted. I listened patiently. "Your success is your own, Sophia," I told her. "You did the work. But you have to understand that the world you were raised in, the advantages you were given, came at a price. A price you never knew was being paid." It was a difficult conversation, and it wasn't the last. Our relationship is not healed, and it may never be. There is a chasm between our experiences that is perhaps too wide to bridge. But for the first time, we are speaking honestly, without the filter of our mother's narrative. We are no longer the golden child and the shadow. We are just two sisters trying to make sense of a broken past. I, meanwhile, poured all my energy into the revival of Ray's Press. Uncle Matteo, with his encyclopedic knowledge of the book world, became my partner. We found a small office space in my grandfather's town. We hired a young, ambitious editor. I used my academic connections to find new, exciting voices in history and literature. The work was hard, harder than anything I had ever done, but it was profoundly fulfilling. I was no longer just studying the past, I was actively shaping a small part of its future. 6 months after that fateful party, we published our first book, The Ray's Press, A Family Legacy, written by Dr. Isabella Reyes. It told the unvarnished truth of my great-grandfather's ambition, my grandfather's scholarship, and the press's unfortunate demise and eventual rebirth. It was a declaration of intent. My mother's name was not mentioned in the book. Her punishment was not public condemnation, but irrelevance. She was a footnote in a story that was no longer about her. My life is different now. I still teach, but I am also a publisher. My small, quiet apartment is still filled with books, but now they are books I have helped bring into the world. The validation I once so desperately craved from my mother has been replaced by a deep, unshakable sense of self-worth. I found my value not by waiting for someone else to recognize it, but by reclaiming my own story. My grandfather left me his library, but he gave me something far more valuable: the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, is the most powerful story of all. It set me free.